Assembly of the School Board to order. It's 5 after 10. My apologies up front. I've got a pretty bad head cold, so if I forget something, please just remind me. If we could have roll call. Mary, oh, I can do that. I'll go through mine. Jeannie Mackey? Here. Jeff Friedman?
Here.
Pat Higgins is excused. Crystal Kennedy?
Here.
Kathleen Plunkett?
Here.
Don Smith?
Here.
Maybe you want to run through yours?
Debbie Osiander's present. Ernie Hall?
Present.
Chris Birch? Harriet Drummond?
Here.
Patrick Flynn?
In the nick of time.
That's always good. Ms. Gray Jackson?
Honored to be here.
Mr. Honeman? Ms. Johnston?
Here.
Mr. Starr is excused. Mr. Trainee?
Here.
Mr. Trombley? We do have a quorum on our side.
We have a quorum on our side. Mr. Baker, do we know if the mayor is going to be able to join us today?
The mayor left just before I did, and I've been here about 5 minutes.
Thank you. Hopefully he's going nice and slow and being safe. So,
Either that or
with that, if everyone could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With that, the minutes, I think everyone has a copy of the minutes.
Move to accept the minutes.
Second.
Been moved and second. Are there any objections to approve the minutes? Seeing none, minutes are approved. Addendums to the agenda. Any other agenda items that folks have? Kathleen, are you about to sneeze or say something? Okay, thank you. Okay, seeing none. Items of business. We'll start with A, Board Assembly Relations. I asked that this be put on the agenda. The relationship between the school board and the assembly is not where the school board would like it. We find that these meetings are really productive. The meetings we've had, like on the library issue, I think were really productive. But when our conversations go into the assembly chambers, we're finding that we feel fairly disrespected, both in how we're chastised by certain members, how we're lectured to by others, resolutions that go out of the purview of the legal authority of the assembly, and that kind of translates into this underlying feeling that our board is feeling, that there's this, because the assembly approves the upper limit, we can tell you what to do. And hopefully I'm characterizing this well. My board is very good at correcting me. And so instead of pinning around it, I just thought I'd put it on the table because it's how we're feeling. And we can rehash the last 6 months and the last year and the last 8 years and the last 16 years. And whether things are better or worse, I don't know, but they're not where we would like them. And I don't know necessarily how to get us off high center and move forward and what commitments we can make to each other. Because at the end of the day, it's about doing the best thing for the city. And I know all the assembly members believe that, and I know all the school board members believe that. So I'm just going to throw it out there of ideas of how we can better work together.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, I don't.
You need to put the mic so we can get it on.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam President. At this point, I don't have any ideas. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for bringing this subject up, and I also want to thank you for being so blatant about how the school board is feeling in terms of the behavior of my colleagues, and hope that, I'm doing okay. Thank you, Madam President.
Ms. Johnson.
Can you hear me now? I'm not sure if this is an answer, because sometimes when we try to fix something, it's kind of social manufacturing. But we used to have an assembly school district committee, and it was for another purpose. And what And actually, one of the first things I did when I went on the assembly was abolish it. That being said, you know, some of our best work has been when we do things like the library, or we explore issues, and you know, the shared services is a fine example of maybe going down that road, and maybe we need to look at that again as far as getting a core group of working folks on either body. I'm not sure if that ever will, you know, personalities are personalities, and sometimes you can't socially engineer beyond that. But this might help as far as communication and working on things like shared services, if there's an interest.
Strum?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this subject up. Can you hear me?
Just pull it closer to you.
Okay. They got new microphones. Why don't we get new microphones?
They don't have many.
I tend to share your frustrations too, especially having served as in your position for 9 years and witnessing the same sort of treatment by the assembly then that doesn't ever seem to quite go away. It's I don't know how to describe it, but I remember being frustrated when I was a school board member at the way the assembly treated the school board, and it was not a pretty picture then. And I don't know if you can legislate. I don't know if you can legislate that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it needs to be done another way. Also, the joint school district assembly committee dealt with facilities and site selection and occasionally other issues. And I thought it was very successful, because there's a lot of detail work in there that there isn't possibly time to do in the public, you know, in the larger assembly chambers, or and I know you guys work very hard on all those issues as a board, and I think it would be a smart idea to bring back some kind of joint committee that gets issues sent to it to deal with and then brought back out, whether they be facilities or not. You're not doing a lot of site selection these days,
Right.
so, you know, in terms of site selection. But once upon a time, the school board was told that we needed to be selecting an elementary school site each year, and I'm sure you're way behind in that area. I have no idea where you are, but we're running out of land, and we really need to be identifying school sites. So I still have concerns about that as we move into the future in Anchorage.
LB and then Jennifer.
Thank you, Madam President. I think before we even talk about or make suggestions on how to make things better, we need to lay a little bit of the groundwork here. And all of us need to remember why we're here in the first place and why we were elected. And we're elected to serve the people in our community, first and foremost. And then secondly, and I won't name names, but some of us need to get rid of that false sense of power and authority, you know, because we represent the people. And I think that that has a lot to do with some of the behavior, this false sense of power and authority. Thank you, Madam President.
Ms. Johnson?
I just wanted to do a disclosure why I got rid of the site selection committee before we went down too far. It was because it ended up clouding the whole process, and it actually made our site selection more difficult and more expensive. But the actual having the combined committee is something that I would be very interested in.
Mr. Freeman?
I do think it would be useful to bring back that committee, and as Ms. Johnson just said, that it may not be for site selection so much as just, there are a lot of other issues. I appreciate both the fact that Ms. Guest raised this issue and that the thoughtful responses from the assembly members. Just raising the issue, I think, gets it out in the air, and I think that's a great start. And as somebody who has been at times just as guilty as anyone else of saying things in a manner or with words that probably would have been best left unsaid, I can understand how it happens sometimes, and I think we just need to be aware and try to realize we are all here for Well, I know, everybody on the assembly, everybody on the board really does have the best interests of the city at heart. And just sometimes we lose track of how best to move that forward. And I appreciate everybody listening to our feelings and being willing to help us get past that.
Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Madam President. I got the old mic. I'll just take the moment to apologize for my generally overbearing and officious manner.
Thank you.
You are a product of the Anchorage School District after all.
Mr. Smith?
I don't know if this won't move. Having served on the assembly for, 10.5 years, and then coming out and participating now for the last year and a half on the school board, I've sensed, and I don't know if it's newness on the part of some members of the assembly, almost like the board is viewed as another commission, like planning commission or board of equalization, when in fact, we can't set the budget dollar amount, which is the authority of the assembly. We are given a significant role to play in the community, and I think that may be playing a little bit into it. I mean, we recommend you're going to set the final amount. You're not going to be able to tell anybody how to spend it, but and I think it's a good system. Matter of fact, I helped write the charter, but I think there may be a little of that the school board is looked upon like planning and zoning commission, and I think just because we're talking about it will help the situation in the future.
Ms. Osiander?
Obviously, I come from the direct opposite of about almost 11 years on the school board. And I tell you, my beginning years on the school board, the assembly, I'll echo Harriet, was, there were some pretty outright aggressive comments personally directed. So I've talked about this at some length with both Crystal and Gretchen, because I'm not perceiving what you're perceiving in terms of level of disrespect. I really am not. Patrick, I wish you had been there back in the early 90s. It was not nice, ugly, in many ways.
I was.
You were a different place then, sir. So what I would say, I totally don't believe that you are in any way treated as a commission. I do think, though, that there's a general feeling or a pervasive feeling among some assembly members that you're not hearing the discontent with the district that we're hearing. Particularly in some neighborhoods, not in all neighborhoods, and particularly in some political factions, not all political factions, there is strong hostility. And we hear it, and we think you don't hear it, is my sense. And there are folks that on the assembly that are pretty frustrated because they feel that they can't do anything, but they're getting the heat. Jennifer, do you agree?
Yeah,
You
I mean, I
nodded?
think we're all representing many
I'm sorry.
different
It's okay.
constituencies.
She nodded.
Yeah.
And that caught me.
I mean-
I apologize.
That's okay.
Right, no.
I just wanted to say, I don't mind setting up that committee again. I think that will help us, though, if we have some specific items to discuss, rather than just create a committee to not talk about anything in particular. But I just, one last thing and I'll quit. On that resolution, which I know caused some real discontent, the assembly really knows that we have very limited control. I think everybody knows that now. It's hard when you first get in the job to know the parameters. But people put in their feelings and wishes. And I think there was an assumption, maybe obviously now in retrospect an incorrect assumption, that you would realize that the only thing that you really had to do, or the only thing we really had control over, was the money. So I'm hearing, but I'm trying to give you a little feedback in defense. Thank you. Sorry, Gretchen.
No, I appreciate that. Ms. Mackey, Mr. Trainee, Ms. Kennedy.
Yeah, thank you, President Guest, for bringing this issue to the forefront too. And I wish that all members were actually here to be part of this discussion. It's unfortunate that some of them are missing. I'm really not generally an advocate for adding more committees for things, but if this were to help things out, then of course would be for it. I'm also usually not for, I don't like beating around the bush, so I'm glad that we've actually got this discussion out on the table. As far as the Harriet, you were saying that the public believes that we are not hearing discontent. I'm disappointed in that, because we are. We have heard discontent. We're fully aware of it, and the board has done a lot of work over this past year, especially just in a lot of different areas, and we're committed to trying to improve things. And I think that it doesn't do the community any kind of service when they see both bodies who should be working together with the best of intentions and not doing things for political reasons. We all really should be working together, and when the public sees maybe what I think is also perceived as disrespecting each other, that does nobody any good. It certainly doesn't do public education any good. So I really hope that from this point forward we can all do better on just really being genuine about our relations and doing what's best.
Mr. Trainee.
Thanks, President. I've been on the Assembly for a while, and I remember those years in the 90s. Debbie, and I think it was your fault. I'm blaming you.
Wait a minute.
Anyway, sometimes it seems we have new members that get elected onto the Assembly, and they think they're a super school board. If they think they are, they should resign from the Assembly and run area-wide to the school board. That's where they need to belong. The Assembly is not a super school board. The only thing we deal with is your budget, because it's set up that way. And you guys represent the entire town. I like you running for the entire area, not by districts. So we'd have areas of town broken apart, one fighting for their schools. You guys do all the schools citywide. And I'm sorry if we have caused you problems. But many of us have just the best intention, and I'm sorry it's gotten to the point where you feel that we don't value you. We do value what your opinion is. Because very rarely do we ever mess in your area, and I apologize for that incident recently. So thank you.
Ms. Kennedy.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I do appreciate the way that you stated everything and got right to the point, so thank you. You know, I think one of my, I guess, frustrations is that we do, I want to kind of echo what Jeannie said too, is, you know, we do hear from the community and we do answer them immediately, and most of the time that's what happens is there is a lack of information that people have. They jump to conclusions, and the first thing they need is good information. And I think what I have found is that rather than getting them that kind of information, we just tend to allow the emotion of that particular issue to spin things up, and that's when it seems to become something more controversial than it needed to be, and I think that's where then the disconnect happens. And my frustration has been that it seems like some assembly members are more willing to just get involved in the spin of things rather than come and ask for clarification or get the information that they need in regard to what really is the issue. And you know, it seems like what I hear mostly are about a couple of different things. One is that we have all these empty schools. That needs to be addressed rather than just go, oh yeah, we have all these empty schools. The district, and this still comes up, the district magically found $11.5 million a couple of years ago. Well, if the district can find $11 million, they certainly don't need to bond again for anything. Well, you know, people need to know where that, how that all came about and how that was resolved. And, you know, so little things like that, that if they aren't addressed with the community members right away, then things just seem to kind of get ratcheted up to a point where, yeah, there's a lot of animosity and anger and frustration on the public side. And that's what I think the board has been trying so hard to do. Interestingly enough, every time we get a complaint, we give them the information, the complaint goes away. Nobody ever writes back or calls back and says, yeah, but, you know, once they've got the information, things calm down. And I think that's been my frustration, is that when that conversation hits the assembly, the information then that they need is not getting out to the public in terms of how things really are. So I do think this committee would be really helpful. It could start to head off a lot of these kinds of issues before they get blown out of proportion. It could absolutely be more than just site selection issues, which that seems to have settled down to a better process anyway. So I do appreciate the conversation. It's kind of a tough one, but I'm glad that you guys know. It's kind of like this idea. We're just kind of feeling like, are we chopped liver? The whole expression about whether or not we're being treated like the proverbial redheaded stepchild, and there is definitely a sense of that. I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of how we handle the kinds of questions or concerns that the public actually has. And as long as we can educate them about things, then things will be better. Things will absolutely be a lot smoother, and we'll have a better educated population.
Mr. Freeman.
I just wanted to add, I have no doubt that Ms. Osiander is correct that it was much worse in the early 90s, just from what little I knew about it at the time. But it's been so good for so long that we don't want to go back in that direction. So that's.
Ms. Reed Jackson.
Thank you, Madam President. Sitting here listening and then realizing, about the committee, establishing another committee, and then realizing that we meet as a whole 4 times a year, I'm not really sure that a committee is really necessary. And as Ms. Oceana said, if we don't have anything to talk about. But since it is, the subject matter is board and assembly relations, why don't we just put that on the agenda every time we meet? The first thing to talk about. And I think that would probably be even more effective than having this subcommittee out there somewhere where people can't make the meetings, and it may end up being useless. But I think to have that as a line item on every single agenda, maybe for the next couple of years, maybe forever, who knows? I think we'll be able to work things out that way. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Ms. Drummond.
Thank you, Madam President. The school board, when I was on the school board, used to have retreats regularly. In fact, we probably had one every year for the 9 years that I was on there, and certainly each time we had new school board members. The assembly, I don't think, has had one since the summer of 2008, when the assembly changed pretty dramatically in that election. And we've had a number of new members since then, and we haven't had a retreat as an assembly, as a body, to share these kinds of issues. And no, it's not social engineering. This is called simply learning how to operate, getting some training. I mean, this is why I go to things like National League of Cities, and I used to get a heck of a lot out of going to the National School Board conventions, because you learn how other people do it. We don't have the ability to go to the next nearest big city and see how they do it. I mean, we don't have any particularly good examples close by, but I don't need to go there. We've got our own issues. And I think perhaps for the assembly, that would be a really good idea. I'm not sure that a retreat of both bodies together would serve any particularly good function, but I think the assembly may need to go back to doing that periodically, particularly when there are new members, so that we don't have to do an all-day thing. We just have to bring people up to speed who clearly come on the assembly without knowing what their role is, what their role is in the community and in the politics of the community and in the budget setting and everything else, because it's clearly it's being missed. It's being missed, and I think we're seeing the results because some of those folks have not had that sort of introduction to public service that I think is lacking.
Ms. Kennedy.
Couple of things. I guess one thing that really struck me is one of the things that's been bothering me a lot about things that go on in with the school district is that we have so many layers. It's not just the school district. It's just government. This whole idea of somebody that has to oversee somebody else, that has to oversee somebody else, and it's just layer upon layer, and we get caught up in that. This whole idea that there's got to be somebody else looking over somebody else's shoulder. And so I certainly don't want to create more of that, but I think there is such a sense of that it makes it hard to understand what your role is. And, you know, just to, I don't want to beat up on the assembly on any of this either, because all of us, you know, Jeff and I can certainly say that we had our time period where, you know, we learned our role in terms of being a school board member, and I know it's got to be the same for assembly members. You know, you learn what that role is, and I guess to a certain extent, I want to hopefully let both of us off the hook, and that is, you know, we all might want to be trying to do what's best for the city, but to a certain extent, we really do have very different goals, and you know, it really occurred to me that there is a different, even though you want to do what's best, there is a different focus where you're trying to do what's best for the taxpayer, and, you know, to a certain extent, school board members wear both hats, where we're trying to do what's best for kids and what's best for taxpayers, and sometimes those things don't necessarily mesh well, you know, so it gets very harried sometimes trying to make that good decision. And I can see where a lot of times that's where the conflict comes in, is because truly the goals to a certain extent are very different. So I guess we just have to figure out how to relay that kind of a message when that conflict comes up, to just allow it to be as respectful of a conversation as possible. But you all know that, so thank you.
Any other comments? So I'll throw a suggestion out on the table, which goes to what Ms. Gray Jackson said, which is maybe having somewhat of a standing item at these meetings, but having under that the ability to ask questions to get clarification of information from any of the board members. It's very hard for us when we're testifying, because you're testifying, those are rules, and, you know, I have great respect for legislative bodies, and when you're testifying versus just sitting around a table, it's a very different thing. You can't have a conversation about it. But if there's areas where assembly members really have questions, you know, I'm going to pick on Jennifer, but she's here, you know, one-time grant money. You know, if there are questions, well, let us do the research and let's have a discussion about that. And to Crystal's point, you know, when we're able to put information out on the table, we may agree to disagree at the end, but at least we have the accurate information out there, and maybe that would help get some of these issues or questions out of the assembly chamber and into a forum where we can have a really robust conversation as leaders. So I'll just throw that out, Mr. Smith.
Going along with what you're talking about, I wonder if it wouldn't make some sense for us to reconsider the time frame that we're meeting on our quarterly meetings, so that we have a quarterly meeting within 2 or 3 weeks of the bond package going before the assembly, and we have another joint meeting before the budget gets presented and talked about, so that there is an opportunity to sit around a table here and maybe spend half an hour explaining and discussing those kind of issues, so to be timely, rather than maybe being 2.5, 3 months out.
We have some flexibility with that. However, we also have the ability to set work sessions at your request. I do not recall a time where I have been asked, or another assembly chair has been asked by the superintendent or the board president to have a work session when we have said no. We can do that.
We didn't know
So
that.
if you
And I don't think
know
we knew
of
that.
issues,
No.
then we can work that out.
Well, that's good.
So that may be a great way to have those conversations before things come in. Good idea. Any other
When I was on the
comments?
assembly, we go down on Ben Marsh's boat for a weekend, and part of us on the assembly would.
Oh, the days of no open meetings law.
Yeah, right.
Well, I appreciate, on behalf of the board, I appreciate the conversation and the thoughtfulness in it. I will make the commitment on the board to try to figure out time that we can sit with the assembly before we have things come to you. And if there are questions or information that you all want, or any of your members want, please get those to us, and we'll get you the information. The next item of business is the SRO funding, and as we're going into the budget, so I have a question. I put this one on. I only put the first two on. So we're going into our budget, and I'm still kind of confused about the SRO funding. So I just figured I'd bring it up. I'm gonna put on the side who should fund the SROs in school and all of that. They're in our budget. At this point, the administration and the boards in the past have thought that it's a very valuable program. But there's a sense that the costs that we pay are the cost for the, I'm not sure what happens to these police officers when they're not in school, and are we paying for services for the city, or are we paying for the services in the school? And I just wanted to clarify it as we go into our budget about what that is, because I've heard lots of different things. So I don't know if it's a Cheryl question or an assembly question or a budget, or Lucinda, sorry, I'm so used to looking at Cheryl for budget stuff.
If I could though interject to make sure that Mr. Honeman is recorded on the record as joining us. Thank you. Cheryl or Lucinda, whoever wants to answer.
Through the chair, okay,
Feel free to.
first I didn't realize that this was on the agenda.
Oh, I'm
I would
sorry.
have done some research. We didn't get the agenda.
That's okay.
But right now, you don't pay the full cost of the SROs, but we'll have to get back to you as to what they do during the time in which it's the summer months and the school's closed.
Okay.
That we'll have to report back to you on.
Okay.
Because I believe we've had that conversation with the group before, and I just don't remember the details.
Ms. Cuomo, and then.
Well, we have talked, and I can't remember, it was you and I and the mayor and Mr. Cobb and others. Anyway, we do not pay for the police cars and all the equipment. What we pay is the personnel costs, the full personnel costs. And then the agreement when this started 9 years ago was that we would have what I call 9 substations, which is where our high schools and Clark Middle School are their offices. We provide the computers, we provide that office support, that kind of thing. But it isn't like I said, the police cars and the equipment and all that. But the biggest impact to us is because some of them are on duty for summer school in the summer, the rest of them are working downtown or on the bikes and so forth, and so they're working for the city, but they're certainly, because they know so many of the young people, they're really, I think, tremendous assets to the downtown area as far as knowing so many of the juveniles. Some of them work in the evenings, and of course some of them take leave, and that's when we've tried to encourage them to take leave when school's not in session. But all of them are highly trained officers, and many of them have multiple, some are on the bomb squad, some are on one of the crisis teams, and so they have to have regular training and certification. So when they're getting that, they go and they're not in our schools. So I think that's one of the things that complicates it, and yet we believe we want really good police officers in our schools, and they all want to be there. They haven't been assigned there, they've volunteered, so it's a balancing act, I think, between is it full-time in our schools versus getting the extra training, doing emergencies. Whenever an emergency happens in a neighborhood, doesn't matter where they are, what school, they go to that. So they really are, in that sense, like substations. I mean, they are available, they're in the community, in the true sense of community policing. So it's always going to be gray. The way it was set up is that they're stationed at our schools, and then they're doing this other work too. But we can certainly talk again with Cheryl and the mayor's office and get you more information. But we did have that initial discussion last year. Can't remember exactly when now, but it's been a while.
Ms. Drummond?
Thank you, Madam President. Carol, I appreciate hearing that about the which part you're paying for, and the 9 substations. That contributes greatly to satisfaction in the neighborhoods. I know I get a lot of positive feedback on the SROs from the community councils in West Anchorage. And since 2 out of the 3 neighborhoods that have the community action policing teams, Sand Lake and Spenard, are in my district, I hear a lot about that. Since the new academy that's in session right now for the police department, the chief has stated as a goal to train these folks, to bring them out of the academy and right into community policing. That's how they're operating. I'd like to see some effort made to keep those officers that are in a particular high school attendance area or Clark Middle School's attendance area in those neighborhoods in the off-season, in the non-school season, because they've already got the relationships built with the folks in that community and the young people in that community who are going to be the adults in that community in a few very short years, or not already, you know, in high school in particular. So I'd like to see some joint effort in that direction. I think the community will get the full benefit of the training that those officers receive and the relationships that they build in their neighborhoods, which are actually small, communities that are truly separate in this town. So using them in that matter, I think would be most productive.
Ms. Johnson?
I just think we have a great opportunity with Chief Mew, who has experience on both sides, and if this is something that you'd like a work session on or something that we can discuss, I think we can. It's an opportunity for us to segregate out the costs as far as what they're doing in the schools. And Chief Mew, I mean, we're just very fortunate that Chief Mew has had a foot in both sides, and he can answer a lot of these questions.
And as we go through a transition, I am a little worried that there's not an MOU or something. We have one, but an updated, but just having that clear as we go through leadership transition as well. Mr. Hahnemann, Mr. Flynn, Ms. Plunkett?
Most of the comments were made by the superintendent. She's pretty spot on. I just wanted to tell you from experience, as a day shift commander at APD back in early 2000, before the SROs, we'd have 22 to 24 officers on shift, and I'd lose 6 to half of those officers to the schools prior to that. And it kind of runs the other way as well. When the SROs are on the school grounds, and events going on in the community, and incidents going on in the community, those officers can break from the school and respond as first responders, stabilize the situation. And some of them, as the superintendent pointed out, use their special skills, SWAT, bomb team, field training, the whole works, and negotiators. And so it's a great program, but I think this is one of the areas I've long been concerned, and I agree with Ms. Johnson. I think we ought to have a work session and kind of decide how we want to proceed for the future. It's the police department employs these officers, they screen the officers, they train the officers. The school district doesn't employ police officers. They don't. I mean, it just seems foreign to me that why we would try to shift the money. They're police officers first. They're assigned to the schools.
Mr. Flynn?
Pass.
Ms. Plunkett?
I like the idea of a work session. I know I've had conversations with assembly members in the past. Jennifer and I have talked quite a bit, and some of them have said, oh, well, if you're paying for them, then you have full control of them. But we really don't, based on what Paul said. They're police officers first. I have been a great proponent and supporter of the SROs. I think that most of the time it's the only true community policing that we really have going on in the city. And in a lot of times it's the only time that parents and students alike are seeing a police officer in a positive arena, as well as being able to use them as mentors for our community. And that's something that I think that we need within this community. So while I do believe in them, I sometimes do have an issue, because I thought we were paying 100% of the costs of them, of at least their salaries, as well as both a sergeant and a lieutenant who does other stuff as well. And I would much rather have them, if we are going to have them, in the schools and try to work their training. I know some do, but there are some that don't. I know when I had services my area last year, that the police officers were there during not only the Christmas break, but also I think it was the spring break. And when the school's not there and they are there working in the office, to me it's maybe not the most efficient use of their time for us as a community. And I'd sure like to see us work that more efficiently.
Mr. Freeman?
Well, I'm never sure, because I don't really enjoy doing it, whether it's worth the time to try to accurately figure out how much time they're spending on school district stuff versus citywide stuff. if somebody can do that and is comfortable with making those kinds of judgments, and we divide the costs equitably that way, then I'm fine. I'm just as happy if we recognize that, okay, the district is paying the full personnel costs for them even when some of the time is spent patrolling the coastal trail in the summer. And in exchange, the city is paying some costs for things the school district uses, like, the running trails in the fall. I mean, it all comes out in the end. Rather than trying to nitpick where each dime comes from and where it goes, if we just realize that we're all providing services that are beneficial to the community as a whole and not try to track each dime, I'm happy with that too.
Mr. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't want to spend too much time because I like the idea of having a work session on this subject. It's a valid subject to have a work session on. But I've never been supportive of the school district paying anything for the SROs. And the reason is because it's sort of like double dipping. You have these parents of school children who are already paying for police service area taxes. And then they're paying twice, in my opinion, when the school district has to pay for this. So I'll talk more about it when we have our work session. Thank you, Madam President.
There seems to be folks that want to volunteer for a work session. Ms. Osiander, since we don't necessarily do work sessions because we're such a small board. Is that something in your purview? You want me just to take volunteers for that? How do you want to? I don't want to step on.
Is the intent to deal with it this budget cycle?
We're coming up on our budget, so I just.
Yours is 2 days time.
Yeah, yours is.
That's
It's not
why I
yours.
asked.
Should be a work session going.
Ms. Cuomo.
I would recommend that it be a work session going forward, certainly maybe between our budget finalization, to have the discussion before, say, first quarter budget revisions for you. But I think the work session would be an excellent idea because the chief and I actually met yesterday and we found the last MOU that's been updated. We're signing right now, so I'll get that to the board. We just, like I said, with all these changes. So I think a work session would be very productive. But I think going forward rather than trying to get it in.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking about going.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking that. Mr. Trainee.
We're just too close to our budget cycle right now.
Yeah.
It's within a couple of meetings, so it'd be good to have it first quarter, and Debbie, as our chairman, can go ahead and set the work sessions up to the clerk and invite you guys to attend it a couple of hours. An hour will do it.
Sounds good. I'll hand it back over to you then for the work session.
All right.
Anything else on that item? Seeing none, the 2012 bond package, I think Mr. Abbott's going to.
Can I just, does everybody have this packet? I hope I gave it to everybody. It's got a letter on the front, says December 1st from Gretchen and I, and then the actual ordinance and AIM is coming to you in your packet, but we wanted you to have that. Does everybody have a copy of that? Okay.
Thank you, Madam President. I was asked to give you a little bit of an overview of how we built the bond package that is before you, and can I get one of those? And then be available to answer any questions about what's inside the bond package. Several years ago, the district initiated a process to create a more transparent and more objective priority setting process for identifying capital project requirements and capital project needs. The current board accelerated the development of that process, and the work that you're seeing today takes advantage of, if you will, about 50% of the completion of that process. And subsequently, we'll be completing that process over the next couple of years, and incoming bond proposals and capital improvement plan projects, or the plan development, you'll see us relying on these more objective and more transparent measurement systems. So that the basic guts of the process that we're instituting suggests that there are 3 basic types of data that we need to take into account when we consider whether a capital project or a facility improvement is required. And that's highlighted on the first page of the front side of the handout I just gave you. The first of those inputs is capacity. Do we need more space for the students that we expect to educate in the future? That's a very that is the most easily quantifiable of the concerns that we need to address, and that's a concern, or that's a type of input that we've been dealing with since the district was formed decades ago. That led to the construction of several new schools over the last 15 years, and it also leads to the conclusion at this point that we're not recommending any additional school construction, new school construction, for the foreseeable future. Second is facility condition. What is the condition of the existing school facilities? We've been using a variety of metrics to help us determine that in the past, primarily based on the, if you will, the human intelligence of our maintenance staff, of the building users, of our capital projects teams. We've initiated a process. We're approximately 50% of the way through the process of getting an external review conducted by a third party of all of our facilities, and using that review to actually create a metric or an index against which we can compare different schools' facility conditions. We've got 39 schools have been done to date. They're essentially the 39 oldest buildings, the 39 schools that we presume will be the neediest in this. Every school is examined on the basis of, they have approximately 40 different components or systems that could wear out or that could require replacement or modification. We examine each of those 40 systems. We are able then to anticipate when each of those systems will require attention, and through that we can assess the relative prioritization of need in those 39 buildings, and soon to be all 93 of our district-owned facilities. That's 87 school buildings and 6 support facilities. So that process is underway. For 39 buildings, we have those indexes, and that was used as a primary driver of the bond package you see before you. The third type of input we need, and we're not as far advanced in the development of this input as we are for facility condition or capacity, is educational adequacy. In other words, how well do the buildings meet our needs of providing an educational function? It's one thing to have buildings that are capable of housing enough students and are in good condition, have good roofs and good boilers and so forth. But if they're not the right type of facilities to provide the education that the community expects, then they're not. Then we have to consider that need as we look at facility improvements. We're in the process of conducting educational adequacy assessments right now. We expect that the CIP that will be presented to the Assembly in March will take advantage of educational assessments over basically the same 39 buildings that we'll have the facility condition information on. And then in the coming years, we'll complete both the facility condition and educational adequacy assessment work for all of our buildings, so that going forward, we will have a living document that can be updated and improved, that can take advantage of new information about the status of our facilities and about educational requirements of our facilities. And based on that, we can bring you and bring the community requests for funding for facility improvements. And that's been our goal. And as I said, the current board has accelerated our use of these tools and the funding for the completion of these assessments. So if you turn the page, so now we'll have 3 types of data. The data, there'll still be some level of judgment that has to be applied. The 3 types of information will not mesh seamlessly. You will not get a single magic number from those 3 different types of data. We're not aware of anybody, other districts, that have been able to create that sort of a single index. But we will have information that tells us what facilities need work to stay in useful condition, which buildings might need to be expanded, although as I said earlier, we don't think that will be an important driver in the near future, and then which buildings need improvements so that they can provide the appropriate amount of educational service. So based on those three inputs, we should then be able to put all of our buildings into one of the four categories that you see sort of in the middle of this page. The first being no action is required. All of the facility condition, the capacity of the building, and the educational functionality of the facility is in a satisfactory or better condition. And we would expect all of our newer buildings, buildings constructed in the last 10 to 15 years, maybe as much as 20 years, to fall into this category. The second one is where we would expect the majority of our buildings to fall. Buildings that have some requirements that need to be addressed in order to deal with issues relating to their condition or their educational functionality. Examples of this would be buildings that need new roofs, boilers, buildings that don't have elementary schools without a gymnasium, other types of improvements that will directly enhance educational functionality or the life expectancy of the facility. And then there's a third category. The third category on here is a major project, a replacement or a renewal. Recent examples of that would be something like Clark or Sand Lake or Chester Valley, the three latest major projects. These projects would be considered or recommended when the volume of educational functionality needs or facility condition needs were such that it didn't make sense to do individual system improvements in the building. It would be more cost effective to engage in a larger project and essentially attack the entire facility rather than pieces and parts. So those are the three basic options. The last one is one that we haven't used extensively in the past, although it's certainly an option that needs to be considered: managed obsolescence. If we identify a facility that we no longer need for the long term, there's no reason why we have to continue to operate it. An example of that is the original Northern Lights ABC building in Spenard. That was a building that was replaced. Debbie remembers the process that went into this. There's a new Northern Lights ABC, Harriet remembers as well, over on Dowling and Lake Otis. And at the time, the plan was not to continue to operate the old Northern Lights ABC for very much longer. It was used as a replacement school for a couple of capital projects, and then the goal was ultimately to close it and to surplus it. As it turns out, we've identified a charter school user for that facility, and we have undertaken a number of projects to improve that condition: sprinkler systems, fire alarms, roofing, bathrooms, etc. So we never actually got to the point where we did surplus it, but we started down that road, and if the charter school need had not emerged, that might well have been the outcome for that program. The John F. Kennedy building on Fort Rich is another example of a school building that's no longer needed for a school. It's going to be dedicated to an alternate use, but that's one that, were it not for that alternate use, we essentially would have stopped doing facility condition improvements, educational improvements on that structure, and it would have been dedicated, or it would have been essentially given back. So those are the four basic options. Now there's hybrids of some of these that are available to us on case-by-case basis, but these are the four basic types of answers that we have for each of our buildings based on the data gathered through the process on the front of the page. So getting to more specifically, how did we take this information and turn it into a bond package? We started with a community review. The district, as many of you are aware, the board members are acutely aware, that we have had for the last several years a capital request advisory committee. It operated for 5 or 6 years, served a great function, but for a variety of reasons, there was a decision made to reconstitute it, to change its mission slightly, to change the way in which it was constituted, and ultimately to create a new entity. That group, similar name, Capital Improvement Advisory Committee, is about half to a third of the size. And instead of appointing folks to that group with a specific expectation that they represent a stakeholder group or a specific school attendance area, which had been how members were selected to the CRAC. The CIAC is constituted of folks, many of which served on the old CRAC, but we explicitly requested and directed that they not represent individual stakeholder or constituency groups, that instead they look at the broader community interest and the broader district interests. That doesn't mean that we don't have a strong geographic diversity. We have a lot of professional diversity. We have a lot of political diversity on this group. And in the packet, you'll see the roster of that group. It still represents, I believe, a useful cross-section of the community to help us make decisions on capital investments and capital improvements. So that group started their evaluation. They asked us to bring them a starting place for a list. We gave them a list of $90 million worth of projects. In the meantime, the board had provided the administration and the CIAC some initial guidance as to the framework for the committee's work, and that framework was taken into account as well. So using that framework of the board's guidance and using this sort of large list of projects as a starting place, the committee worked through. They met 3 or 4 times over the course of about 3 or 4 weeks, 3 weeks, I guess, 3 weeks, Rachel, right? And then they developed a recommendation for the administration to consider. The administration considered that, made a couple of minor adjustments to that recommendation, and then brought that to the board in October for the board's evaluation. The board took final action on that recommendation in November, and that's what you see before you as a recommendation for assembly approval. And that was introduced just before Thanksgiving, and I believe is set for public hearing. Well, I'm pretty sure it's set for public hearing on Tuesday night. In a normal course of business, we might well have asked for a dedicated work session on that subject, but since we knew this meeting was scheduled in the same time frame as when a work session might have otherwise been scheduled, we presumed that this could serve that purpose and give us a chance to answer any questions that the assembly might have. Thank you.
Michael, thank you for the overview. Ms. Johnson, Ms. Osiander, and then I'll go around the room.
2 things. One, did I hear did you have a consultant for this matrix? So it's sort of going with national or best practices standards, right?
We have consultants, 2 separate consultants. One is helping us on facility condition, and one is helping us on educational adequacy. For educational adequacy, what they're doing is they're evaluating our structures against our educational specifications, the specifications that the district has developed over time to identify what we believe is appropriate for facilities for educational purposes. So they're taking existing condition and measuring that against our standards and identifying the variances.
So it's somewhat it's tailored best practices, tailored for your strategy.
Yes, and the ed specs, although they're developed with local needs in mind, so when we build a site, we build in room for things like snow storage and things like that, and there's a big enough room for the snow blower at our school sites. They are based on national standards, and we've used national tools, nationally developed tools to help us develop those ed specs.
Actually, 3 questions. And you build for 50-year life, right? Is that?
At least.
At least, okay. And then
now, not all systems in the building
right.
have a 50-year expected life, but the bones, if you will, are constructed for at least 50 years. But not we don't build roofs that necessarily will last for 50 years or Not all the mechanical systems, et cetera, are rated for that type of useful life.
And my last question, when the package we received showed the breakdown where you had 46 million in requests and then an additional 15 million. Is that
13.
13.1
for
yeah.
45 and 13.
Yep. Details.
You're in the ballpark.
Right. Anyways, so the process that you just explained to us got you the 46?
45.
45, yeah, 45. Actually, it's 45.9, right?
Correct.
Rounding.
And the career technical for West was an additional, it was
13.
and it was not, so it was above the line.
It was above the line that the CIAC and the administration used as to build the proposal for the board.
Added up, okay.
The West Romig CTE project was on the list of the $90 million list that I described originally. It's a great project.
Right.
It wasn't a lack of support for that project. It was whether or not we could include it inside the $45 million sort of target that we were shooting for.
And this whole concept is an organic concept that's going on for a 10-year, 15-year project. I mean, it's
The CTE project,
The,
you mean?
the CTE
Yes.
versus the West Broming.
Right.
It is definitely an important part of the district's overall CTE program, and it's a very worthy project. It's just a question of how big of a bond package.
okay. Thank you.
Ms. Hosiander?
2 questions. First, I applaud the new process, and I think it's going to be great, so kudos on that. I did, though, look at the list on the facility condition assessment, particularly then for Iliamna and Rabbit Creek because of those numbers. I saw Iliamna mentioned, but then I saw several mentioned that seemed significantly further down the assessment list, like, I don't know, Bayshore, what was the other ones?
Susitna.
Yeah.
There are some projects.
Why didn't you include Rabbit Creek?
Let me first address the second half of your question. Simply because a building has a relatively low index score, that's made up of a number of components that have issues. If the component is a critical one, even though it may not create, it may not drive a big index number, it may still require immediate attention. A good example is a fire alarm system. Fire alarm system is not a particularly expensive component, and as a result, since the index is driven by dollars, the more expensive the components that need replacement, the higher the index. So schools that have expensive components that need replacement,
Necessarily.
it is. When we were talking about this with the board and with the committee, we segregated these into what we called emergent conditions, which were things that needed to be done to keep the school in operation in the very near term. Fire alarms, boilers, things like that. Even if those were in schools that didn't otherwise have high indexes, we still prioritized those projects, and the committee and the board agreed with that.
So don't look at it simply.
Exactly.
Darn.
It can't be used in a vacuum.
Okay, second question. The only rationale I've seen so far in the material I've read, and I haven't read it completely, for the additional CTE at West, the comment was, well, now they're getting no CTE at West. Is that true?
No.
Oh, thank you.
No, it's, Ms. Osiander, it's not true. They are getting program offered that are within the classroom structure that exists there now. And some of these that have been a very high priority are with needing more sophisticated equipment. They need larger spaces, and so this whole idea that we've been advancing this career and technical education program, and we can get you more information about what is going to go into that facility.
My sense is you're going to need to rationalize that part of it.
Okay, we can do that before Tuesday night. We can certainly be
That's sort of a
prepared
hint
to
of
respond. No, that's good, because, but we have the school district has had a multi-year phased-in plan on CNTE, and last year the bonds that passed had the first phase, this next group, they're coming along, so we'll get you some information.
I wanted to clarify something on the facility condition index, that what the CIAC decided to recommend is on the things that are 0.3 and above, that there are priority projects within each of those that take those indexes down, which is different. You could choose to just do Mount Iliamna, right? So that's all we're going to do because that's the most critical. And instead, the recommendation was, no, look at the components that are the most critical, and let's start moving each of those facilities down to what the industry standard is, which is 0.3. So that's the direction that we're going at this point, is over time, our goal is to have everything at a 0.3 or below, and then be able to maintain that so we don't get into this situation of critical need. Mr. Hall.
Yes, basically, Ms. Johnson and Ms. Osiander touched on my part of the question. I was anxious to hear a bit of the rationale on the part of the board. You've got an incredible process in place. You come up with a recommendation of 45.9, but then the board did a 30% increase on top of what the committee and the administration had recommended. And God knows I love CTE. I've chaired it for so long, it's unbelievable. I probably understand that as much as anyone, but probably part of what will, I'll throw some caution to you, is the recommendation that we stay in bonding under what we've paid. And this, of course, puts you above what you paid off last year. I think, bonds are probably going to be a tough sell to the community again this year. As you're aware, the resolution that you got, we ended up with bonding. Resolution we actually sent to our own administration was no bonding at all, and we're ending up with about a $32 million bond package there. But just kind of like a little insight into the conversation that occurred amongst the school board for the justification of a 30% increase over what was recommended to you.
Mr. Drummond, would you like us to get an answer for you, or should
Mr. Hall?
No, but Ms. Drummond was next. So do you mind if I skip to an answer and then
go
come
ahead.
back?
Yeah, go ahead. But I have a comment on.
Okay, Mr. Smith, you.
Being the big spender on the school board, I'm the guy that pushed the amendment for West, and I really think West was being neglected in the whole concept of current technical. I mean, we probably would be doing this next year if it hadn't passed, but that community really feels like they need about a $300 million new high school, but I don't think that's going to happen in the near future. But I really think that CTE is a very strongly supported concept in this community. West really, with the exception of those classroom type CTE programs, doesn't have anything. And I attended Anchorage High School when they had wood shop and metal shop and auto mechanics in the building. And I really strongly feel that, being fiscally conservative, I still think if I could have willed everything on this bond issue, I would have had a couple of bond issues for schools, but it was clear to me that that wasn't going to happen. But I really think that West Romick deserves an opportunity to have a facility just like all the other high school and junior high, middle school complexes. And I think the public is going to have the final say if they really want to kill all the projects. I think we've got a good package, and I hope you won't take that out. I think it ought to be allowed to go to the voters.
I'm going to keep going down the list, and then I'll.
Well, it was part of that conversation. Oh,
yeah,
I did have it too.
Okay, and Ms. Drummond does as well. So I'm just going to keep going down the list. Ms. Drummond.
Okay, thank you. On the West thing, as a graduated West parent and paying really close attention to West High School since the late 80s, I have seen those shop classrooms, Don. They were being phased out when I started to realize that there are needs in this district beyond the elementary school, which my kid happened to be attending at the time, which had 11 portable classrooms. And West has been incredibly patient, and they've also been very supportive. The whole West Anchorage community has been really supportive of everybody else's school bonds at the ballot box, as one of our constituents noted in a very thoughtful email the other day. And I think the longer we wait, the more expensive that replacement project is gonna get. Number one, because construction costs are not going down. They are only rising, and until kids stop going to school and people stop driving on roads, then we can stop doing maintenance work. I mean, I think that's a pretty ridiculous attitude when we've got a thriving community that continues to grow, and until kids stop trooping through our schools at the rate they're doing it, we're going to have to maintain those buildings so we can educate those kids and deal with our investment. I think West has felt incredibly left out of that whole process of high school renewal, that we all know how many tens of millions of dollars we spend on each of those other high schools, and West is still sitting with the same, basic good bones and all of that stuff, as they found out when they did a minor renewal a few years ago, with a couple of additions, but the core of the building needs a ton of work, and they're not going anywhere. They're going to keep going to that school, and Ms. Osiander and I were in boundary changes, which were probably the most painful thing we did in our 9 or 10 years on the school board, and that's not something we want to have to do to a community. And I do have another couple of questions, but I'm willing to let the West piece continue and come back for that.
All comments on West done, and then go
Okay,
back
thank you.
to the list set up for Mr. Harmon. Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Friedman.
Well, I just wanted to point out something that I don't want us to lose sight of, and that is, yes, it looks like more than what was paid off last year, but we need to keep in mind that we have had one small bond pass in the last 3 years, and in that amount of time we've actually paid off about $250 million worth of bonds. So, we have to make sure that we keep that overall perspective. It's not just compared to last year. It really is kind of our bonding history, so to speak, and that's actually very impressive in terms of what's been paid off recently.
Ms. Friedman.
Yeah, more specifically, over the last 5 years, even if this bond passes, we'll still be over $100 million less than where we would have been. But that said, I don't think it's realistic to assume that, just like with roads, you're not going to repave a road after 20 years for the same cost you paved it 20 years earlier. Prices go up, and to assume that either the school district or the city will always be submitting to the voters a lower dollar amount of bonds than was paid off in the year before, if we follow that path, we will have potholes and we will have falling down schools. You just can't do it. I was convinced that this was a worthy addition, partly because what we had given to the committee was an artificial number. We told them, try to stay significantly below the amount that had been paid off the year before, partly because of what we heard from the assembly, and partly because that gives the school board some flexibility. The committee process is used for a recommendation. It's not something that we say, oh, we're going to delegate our authority to the committee and never change from that. Similarly, the superintendent takes the committee's recommendation and makes her own recommendation to us, and we value those recommendations highly, but we do not delegate the final decision to either the superintendent or the committee, just as you don't delegate the final decision to us. You look at what we do very carefully and make your own decision. West has CTE. It has some thriving CTE programs, but it does need the space, and whether it's this year or next year or the year after, it is something that really does need to be done, and the question really is, are the voters going to balk because we're $4 million over what we paid off last year, or are they going to look at the projects and evaluate them? I don't think whether we're $4 million over or $4 million under is going to decide the vote. It's going to be whether they're willing to bond at all.
Any other comments or questions, Mr. Hall?
Just a quick follow-up, Madam President. My colleague did point out to me that when we did our final draft resolution to our own administration, we did delete that, therefore, no bonds. As in an original one for you, we had it the same and revised it. You know, I very clearly understand, and I don't know that when I was selling if I were selling this pack to the community, I would address the fact that it's for more than you've paid off this year. If I was going to make a message, it would be more on the $150 million that has been paid. I follow that. I was just more interested in the thought, the discussion that occurred that caused you to make that type of an increase. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
On Ms. Fromming?
Generally, yeah.
Okay,
The
so
la-
I'm gonna come back to you on your questions. as well.
Right, the last time this district ignored construction needs, we ended up with a $175 million bond package that passed in 1994 after going for years without doing work. I don't have the history of bond issues or maintenance issues or any of that stuff, but there was so much pent-up demand that this community overwhelmingly supported. And I think there was another one sometime in those 9 years of similar size. And a lot of new schools were built, and a lot of renovations and repairs and additions and all of that stuff, and that has stood us well for a while. But as Mr. Friedman pointed out, we can't spend less when costs are going up. In fact, when we get criticized about personnel costs going up and all that other sort of thing, I don't see the construction community getting criticized about their charges going up in terms of these kinds of things. So I think that needs to be front and center when we have these discussions in the future. If we're all dealing with with cost increases, we have to be rational about it in terms of how we fund those cost increases, because clearly they're not going away.
Thank you. I want to make sure we get all the other questions, especially from assembly members, answered on the bond package. Any other comments about West at this time? I'm sure you all will discuss it more fully on Tuesday. Ms. Drummond, you had a couple other questions about the package, and then Mr. Hahnemann?
I do, thank you. How many relocatables are still in use in the Anchorage School District?
We have a fleet of approximately 140 relocatables.
The same 140.
The same one.
More than, well, yeah,
No,
not
one
all of
burned
them.
down and we replaced one.
Fleet implies that they're mobile, and not all of them are ever. You can take the out of
Fleet
relocatable
sounds like they have
in
wings.
many cases. Approximately between 100 and 110 are being used for classroom or instructional purposes. The others are being used for storage.
Okay, the rest storage. Great, thank you for that answer. I appreciate that. It sounds like the same 140 that were out there when I was on the school board.
Exactly.
And just getting older.
No, except the one that burned down. One
When did
burned
that
down
happen?
and got replaced.
Oh, good. Okay. I didn't even hear about that. Okay, how are the maintenance issues going in the dozen or so standard schools that were built in the beginning in the late 80s and in the mid 90s? And it's been so long, I don't even remember what we call those schools anymore. Prototype. Thank you, Carol.
There's it's kind of the 80s prototype, and then there's kind of a 90s prototype as well. They're doing great. What you'll see, and those of you that kind of recognize the ages of some of these buildings, basically facilities constructed since the mid 80s are, roughly 25 years old now. They're doing great. Their components are generally, not in every case, but generally exceeding their anticipated useful life. Where we're seeing big issues, and this is why we have such a big surge of high school challenges right now, is, we built 4 high schools in, 10 or 12 years, all of them, in the late 60s to mid 70s, and they're all struggling. And those are the ones that, we service. Chugiak, we've done a lot of work on. Bartlett, we've done a lot of work on. East, Diamond was replaced. So that's where a lot of our investment has been, and frankly will continue to be needed going forward.
Okay, great, thank you. And on the old, the old Northern Lights ABC school, the charter school is paying rent on
Correct.
that, right? Is that rent being applied to these maintenance issues and replacement issues?
Yes, essentially. They're paying rent to the general fund. We're not only doing the maintenance work that they pay for. They're being treated like any other school building facility, and their maintenance requirements are prioritized along with every other facility in the district. So it's being treated like a district-owned facility.
And does the rent money still come out of their classroom funds, or is the state providing them some facilities funds?
They get an allocation through the general fund as their budget, and their rent has to come out of that. The state has never, if you'll remember back when the legislation first came in, the reason we were against it, only because there was no consideration of facility costs, and that still is a big issue. But they also have got a very invested volunteer crew that our maintenance people do what, as Mike said, but they also have done a lot of the painting, for instance, and we worked through that with our Teamsters Union to make that work for that particular charter school, to keep that facility so that it's workable for them.
I'm happy to hear that, especially since it's in my district and I drive past it periodically. I've noticed the new playground, the fencing of the campus and that sort of thing, and I've talked to some parents there who have had some concerns. I remember when the Muldoon Elementary School, which resembled Northern Lights ABC, was demolished and replaced a long time ago. I was actually surprised to see that it's still in the inventory and apparently going to continue for quite some time. So, okay, thank you.
Mr. Honman.
Thank you, Madam President. Okay, there we go. All right, I was looking through the list and I made a few notes here, so I may have just a few quick questions. And if I have to if you have to research and get back to me, I'd be more than willing to take it offline. Number one, I'm glad to hear about the expected life cycle on a building. That was one of my questions. And easy to note that 18 on the list of the facility condition assessment summary. And I'm assuming this is the list either as was requested by this committee or projects that are identified that need to be completed or worked on. Is that
if you're looking at the FCI list,
correct?
It is what it is. I mean, those are all the buildings that we have an FCI for. We don't have FCIs for the other 54 buildings.
Okay, that was my first question.
It's under development, so we'll get those numbers. We expect that those are the buildings that have the highest FCIs, based on and that's why they were prioritized for the assessments ahead of the other buildings. So we could be surprised, and there may be a few buildings out there that are yet to be done that may have relatively high FCIs, but these should be, for want of a better term, the worst in terms of their current condition.
Good. That's good to hear. Well, it's good to know the information. I'm trying to be able to answer questions to the community councils when we're talking things. The other one is I noted that 18 of those on the FCI are over the 50-year expected life cycle. So that's a good note, I guess you could say. But I did pick two that I saw that were built, and I think Ms. Drummond was alluding to, in the 80s. And one of them, surprisingly, is Gruning Middle School. It was built in 1981 with a .41, and yet going down to the bottom of the page, Hanshu Middle School, built 3 years later, a little larger school, is a .05. So I don't know, I looked real quickly in the packet, and I found that there was some identified electrical issues or such. I didn't see anything else, but I haven't researched the whole packet yet. Is there a reason? Is something going on with that particular design or built? Was there something wrong when it was built? I guess that's my question.
Well,
Greening has a real history. I could talk to you for half an hour.
Greening and Henshaw, although they were built, they're of a similar generation, they are not on the same design. And Greening has a number of system challenges, some of which are addressed in this bond proposal, many of which are not. It's likely that if the district has its way, you'll see greening projects on your on bond proposals for several years. There's a number of systems at Greening that are essentially at risk and need to be addressed either through major repair or, in most cases, replacement.
And then the Girdwood K through 8, and I noticed that it scored a .043, and I recognize there's money in the bond for design for Girdwood K through 8, but it noted also that there was no recommendation to put a bond in for the building and construction. That's correct.
That's correct. Again, another, from the district, and I believe the committee's point of view, another worthy project, simply one that couldn't be afforded at this time.
And I guess it goes to the next level, which is there some anticipated needs date? I don't know if there's any metrics that, we all understand that Girdwood is still kind of in design. There's some areas that are up for redevelopment and zoning and all that. There's future growth potential, but is the facility in hand that we're currently using, can it accept certain growth in that community up to a point? I guess that's my question, is if we're talking about worthy and needed projects, the need to me is it one of those like what's that Field of Dreams, build it and they will come, or is it when they come we'll try to decide to build it?
No, this, the project that is anticipated for Girdwood would not significantly expand the capacity of this facility. Right now, it has a number of challenges, both on the FCI that you mentioned, as well as educational adequacy. Girdwood doesn't have a gym. Its classrooms are almost universally too small for the function that they are being asked to perform. It has, it's a K through 8 program, so it is supposed to be providing a middle school curriculum as well. And that's one of the areas where it falls particularly short of the district's expectations, especially in the area of science and applied CTE. So Girdwood has a number of problems. Its current facility is...
It rains.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm not saying I want to live there either, but...
No, but it rains in the schools too.
Yeah, so it has both a combination of facility condition and educational functionality challenges. And that's why, if you look at the matrix, it's not a school that we're recommending just fixing some of the components. It's one that we believe requires a renewal. And the final scope of the renewal is yet to be determined. It'll be determined during this design process. But it's going to need a lot of work, more than just a new roof, a new boiler, and a gym. We would expect to touch the majority of that facility with the project. And it would be available, the design is funded by the bonds this year. Conceivably, a proposal for that construction project could come forward as soon as next year.
Just a question on Girdwood. Any consideration given to busing the middle school kids to town?
Yes, and then no.
I don't remember if you and Ms. Osiander were still on the board when we went through multiple years of discussion on this. I mean, we have done that investigation. There is a very strong feeling they want a K-8 school. We believe that's appropriate. And so we are not interested in busing the 7th and 8th graders into town. We think that's a viable K-8 school in that community. And so this master plan, we think with the way it's been done, that it will accommodate future growth to a point, but we think it will work because the classrooms will be reconfigured, because they will be upgraded to the point that they can have a very viable educational program.
Yeah, I wasn't intending to suggest that that needs to be the consideration. I'm just throwing that out there. And what's the population of the school right now?
It's close to 200, and it goes up and down.
Still about the same.
It's definitely growing slowly, but and the demographics have changed because a number of there's some affordable housing down there that wasn't there a few years ago, but they are definitely seeing a steady, slow but steady.
And well, you don't have a projection for the size of the new facility or the revised facility.
It's essentially similar capacity to what is currently planned for. I think it's about 225 or 230, but student capacity.
So it can take
We're
some.
not planning
It
for
can handle some
300
growth.
student population.
It can handle some growth. In other words.
It is the most volatile attendance area in the district in recent years. They have. It's not been uncommon in years to see them have 7 or 8% swings up or down. You know, school starts, and this year I think it was 23 or 24 kids showed up that were not expected.
Wow.
Which is great, I guess. But it's a challenge for that structure, and we expect that volatility will continue in the future.
Are there relos there?
No, not currently. And the site currently would not support reloads. It will after a renewal.
You mean the former dump? I mean, you
It's
know,
all been taken care of.
assembly members need to hear this. This building, this school was built on a dump, and I don't remember how much money we spent removing the dump from underneath it. That was unbelievable.
So, continue on then, President. The next one was, and I appreciate the direction on the first page, the first 5 points. And I think they're pretty spot on as to direction on the board. The thing that caught my eye, and which I've really always been much more supportive of, I get the fact, and I think what Mr. Hall was kind of alluding to, that we really rely a lot on the public input on this bonding and reimbursement formula that the legislature has taken up, 60 or 70%. But the impetus, of course, then, if they're supported by the voters, it means they voted to bond and that they're willing to pick up the other percentage. And of course, that's two sides of the house, and so we're getting it, for the lack of better terms, it comes out of your same wallet, your same funding, your own personal budget, but people thinking they're getting a double hit, and it's just the perception of it. So I really like the number 2, the approach to state for the 70% reimbursement from strictly for capital projects, not necessarily tied to the bonding process in public. I think that's a good approach, and until we get there, I suppose we have to work with what we have. But my question as it relates to that is, on the maintenance budget for the school district, what's the current maintenance budget? I'm sure I could find it in the budget book. The current maintenance budget for the district.
Approximately $21 million.
And then, is that divided basically by?
Hold on, I'm being corrected here. 29 million, excuse me.
29 million. And is that divided by facility, by size, by high schools get a certain amount, middle schools? I mean, how does that work?
No, that is, that pays for a staff of maintainers and a limited amount of project funding, and that is allocated based on need around the district.
Okay, now, and my point of getting this, does that also include like janitorial, cleaning, snow removal, any of that kind of stuff?
Snow removal, yes. Janitorial, no. So some of that maintenance is what you would call regular maintenance. Others,
if it gets broken, a door needs fixed.
Others is more significant maintenance, repairing roofs and things like that. It's not replacing roof sections, which is what we would consider a capital expense. But we have roofing crews, carpentry crews, and other crafts represented on our workforce, and they do the day-to-day maintenance on our facilities.
And the reason I ask this, and the reason I try to chase this down a little bit is, there are some prevailing thoughts that I noted again earlier, bleachers for a school, for instance. One of them I think indicated 50,000 expense, another 250,000. Some might think that might just be something that, there's a serviceable life on a functional system that may need to be replaced over a 10-year period or 20-year period, and can that be taken out of funding? And so my question, I guess, to follow up, to be able to explain to our constituents and people who ask these questions, is it enough? Should it be 30 or 35 million? Is the maintenance budget enough to take care of those type of projects so that we don't necessarily have to go back and say, we'd like to stuff the bond with $43 million and we're going to split it. 23 million is going to pay for things that we could pay for if we had the money adequately in a budget.
I'll start, and I'll bet there's some board members that
and this may be
comment
something
on
I
this.
need to get later on, so I fully expect this.
Yeah, this is a big philosophical question. The board has been wrestling with this for many years, as to how much of this do we try to pay for out of our operating budget, and how much do we seek debt reimbursement for. I think the board members would be, anyway, it's probably a conversation, Mr. Honeman, that might need to continue to a later day.
I think so. I recognize. I'm just making a comment. So I appreciate the info. Also, I just wanted to tell you that last night I was at one of my community council meetings, and Representative Lance Pruitt was addressing and talking about something that's not on the budget. It didn't come in on the bond, which is the artificial turf at Bartlett High. And so this has been always that conundrum that we've been facing with. This municipality sends a legislative priority list. The school district has one later coming in. Then the community councils come in. So there's 3 to 4 or 5 different entities slinging projects all over, and it's very hard to track. And so I just wanted you to know that Representative Pruitt is working with East High principal and staff, and also Bartlett, and he's very interested in supporting a CIP funding request for the artificial turf at Bartlett, even though it's not on your list.
be on our list.
If I could, the legislative grants that are coming in from the schools, all of those that you mentioned are coming in from the schools to go to the legislative grant process, as has been a separate process from the bonds. And they're scrutinized, and the legislature has been more amenable to those kind of grants. The governor, in discussion, has also been supportive of things like the artificial turf, and so that's the approach we've been using the last 3 years.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the bond package at this time? Mr. Cheney and then Mr. Gray Jackson. Just to let you know, we have 3 more items and 18 more minutes, so.
Just a quick question for you. Ursa Major firearm upgrade. I think this was the DoD school, wasn't it, that we absorbed? Was it brought up to mini standards when we assumed it? Can we get money from the feds to pay to upgrade it?
It was, not every system was brought up to brand new standard, but it was every system in all 7 of the buildings on base were brought up to a satisfactory standard when the school district took ownership of those facilities. We do get impact aid money. It varies in amount. It's usually somewhere between, it's something less than $1 million a year generally, and that is applied only to base facilities. This would be in addition to what would be paid for by impact aid.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Madam President. First off, I thank the school district. You did do a really good job with the bond package, vetting everything before you brought it before us. And since we were working on school board assembly relationships, and not to put any of my colleagues on the spot, but does anybody that's left here right now have any plans on bringing forward any amendments on Tuesday to this package? Don't look at me like that. I'm just, really, let's talk.
Ms. Osiander.
I think the amendment, if it comes, will be related to the CTE at West.
Yeah.
So I envision potential assembly discussion about eliminating that and or separating it into a specific bond. That's why I suggested to these 2 folks that that's where you guys need to focus your attention. That's my projection.
And Madam Chair, I really appreciate that, because I just think that it's fair to let the school board know that that's a possibility while we're here holding hands.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam President.
We appreciate that, Mr. Trainee.
Debbie, so you envision a split coming with 2 bonds? Is that what you're saying?
Well, considering what I know of us and where we're from, there will be some people who want no. There will some people who absolutely want it to be at the lower point, and there will some people who want all. And
The reason I ask is because normally when it comes forward to us, the title, we can't change it. So if somebody wants to do this, they would have to submit another title, because you cannot amend it and split it.
Right.
Well, we could take off part.
You can take off, but you can't create another one
Good
unless it's in front of us.
Thank you, Dick. That was a
Thank
good
you, ma'am.
point.
And we appreciate that. We, on the split, because since it just came up, we really are trying to create a process, just so the Assembly knows, that is focused on need in an objective way. And so we would hope that you would consider that when we put in, and I'm hoping, at least for the next couple of years while I'm on the board, that we can present packages to the community, to the Assembly, that are based on need together. So we hope that you will consider it, as we did have the discussion at the board level. And really, with this new process, don't want to go to let's pick and choose what we want. We're not deciding on which educational programs we're wanting. We're deciding on really the basic educational needs of our facilities. So just to let you know, that was the thought process behind 1 package versus 2. It wasn't political, and it wasn't what is going to pass in this and that, but it was a really robust conversation about what is the need in our community and presenting that need to the community for a vote. Other questions, Ms. Kennedy?
Well, not a question as much as a comment. I just wanted to point out that I thought that the district did a really good job in the memorandum 120 that came before the board on November 14th, and I wanted to point out specifically that It's in your packet, it's the last attachment in the packet, and on the second to the last page, full page, it's actually page 8, there's a very good narrative summary of the overall debt service and the part that the state debt reimbursement program pays and all of that. So for those that like numbers, there's some really good numbers in there, so I just wanted to point that out. Thanks.
Okay, just one question.
No, that's fine. I mean, this is the most pressing thing in front of us. So
When does the assembly have to finalize the bond package? Next week?
Hearing is on Tuesday.
The hearing's on Tuesday.
We put it a little earlier than I anticipated at the request of the district, so the vote is on Tuesday. But I mean, potentially.
Does it have to be?
My understanding is we have a little flexibility and we can defer that. However, the district has requested we deal with it expeditiously.
Okay, the reason I'm saying is because there's several assembly members who probably needed to hear this conversation, who aren't here, clearly. If there's some way we can make the tape available to them, as quickly as possible, they may not, we can't make them listen to it, but, I think they really need to hear this conversation, and it's unfortunate that they missed it. So if there is some way for us to delay the vote on that,
Well, a motion could certainly be made at the
Okay.
meeting to continue or to defer to a date specific.
Okay.
Carol just said she thought it was February.
Well, now I think it's January.
We'll check on that and
Okay.
give you a date specific.
thank you.
That's just my request, that we give the clerk's office get the drop dead date.
Yeah, we will.
I
We'll
think,
have-
the communication from the clerk indicated that your your currently scheduled meeting prior to the deadline is January 31.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
thinking roughly that time period, but
Okay.
I don't know specifically. We'll find out and we'll email everybody or
Thank you.
announce it at the meeting.
And just for the assembly to be aware, because it was, I think, a couple meetings ago that we discussed it, we are going to try to get you these recommendations earlier than this. And the reason is we had a very good work session with the Bond Yes folks. And in trying to present our bonds, when we do it in that short amount of time, it is really difficult on the Bond Yes folks and on the district to do that. So we would really like to be able to get these bond recommendations to you sooner than even this date in the future, and get those passed fairly quickly so we can go out and have the community conversation, have the robust conversation we had here today about why these projects, what is that to do. So there is a reason we asked for it to be expeditious, and that was because we'd really like to have that community conversation. Besides that, I'm on Dave's staring on the 13th, and that's what we're gonna talk about, so.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I would suggest that we just defer at least the last two, unless you think that we can deal with the libraries fairly quickly. The last two were put on the request of the mayor, and he's not here, so.
Actually, I would like, if Lucinda, would you be able to speak to the last item?
Instead of the library, when you want to skip the.
Yeah, I'd like to skip the if that.
The library was Harriet's item, so I don't wanna skip over a requester.
Actually, I'm willing to defer that. I'm just looking to see, I hear rumors of ideas that are out there and funding and locations and various things, but I haven't seen anything concrete, and I'm just curious what the status is.
The status is we are waiting for the city to approach us with which location and how they want it to work. I think we have a good framework for how we can make it happen, and so it's in the city's court right now.
And we're in a little bit of a difficulty without having a director,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, all right, so it's with the library department right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's with the city
So that's why-
right now, but I
and
think we
some
have
of
the
the- some
we
of
have the
your
framework
assemblies.
worked out.
So that's why we haven't seen anything.
I would guess so.
Okay.
Have to ask the city.
Okay, thank you, that's all I need.
Okay. So E and F, and the group wants to go to F. Is the
I
move's not
just,
here for E?
I'm asking if Lucinda has something to report on that.
I can represent the mayor.
Sure, please. I didn't know.
Well, as everyone in here knows, we, being the school district and the municipality, have over the past year looked at the potential for combining our data centers. And some analysis was done, and the municipality worked with the school district, and the school district decided to enter into its own data center in such that it would look at the cost to implement the MOA data center, the cost to implement an ASD data center versus the cost to implement a combined data center. So that was his request. He wanted to present it to this board such that independent review would be done and that it would look at the data center on an integrated, consolidated basis.
Mr. Trainee?
Just a quick question. I said that the last study that we did citywide, have we addressed the issues that were brought up on that one?
We are beginning to address some of those issues.
What was the cost on that one, ma'am?
The Excipio study was $125,000, and then we did a change order and asked Excipio to do an analysis of a data center. And so we received a full data center analysis and design from them for an additional $30,000.
When do we anticipate getting a response to the first Excipio study?
Mid-2012.
Thank you.
And I say a response, that's when we plan to implement the recommendations, some of the recommendations that were made in that report.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Friedman, Ms. Johnson?
I know we have been moving forward with plans at Kennedy. Do we know when we are anticipating moving into that facility?
July 1.
So it would seem like this study would come out after we've already moved. I'm not sure that there'd be any savings at that point.
From the mayor's perspective, I'm not sure, how much has already been spent in regard to the ASD data center. However, at some point in time, you do recognize that there could be just some costs. You just write it off and you recognize that going forward, that there are savings in the long term.
Ms. Johnson?
I was just wondering, is the mayor thinking of having this as amendment on the current contract, or what was his third-party review gonna be of this? Where would that come from?
We have a contract with Excipio. We could amend that contract. Excipio is already familiar with our data center. They did participate in understanding some of the business requirements with ASD, so they would be able to do it very cost effectively.
And Lucinda, if I could, because I'm catching up a little bit, I'm unfamiliar with the ask right now of the mayor's office. I mean, so I'm not sure what you want from either the assembly. Is this just an FYI, you're gonna do this, or is there a specific ask from the school district and the assembly?
Madam President, there is a specific ask that the two bodies consider stepping back and reviewing this externally to see the return on investment, if in fact it makes sense. Because I believe the design work may have been done for the on-base school, but I'm not certain that if Carol, has any physical construction begun?
I need to get my people to put together a report. This is the first, when it hit this agenda, we have not got any information in the request, so it would help if you get the specifics. We'll get you the information, because I don't wanna just give you an answer right off the top of my head at this meeting. So we're well proceeding forward.
So yes, so that, Madam President, is the request that the two bodies consider an action, and so that we can look externally, because both bodies, the school administration and the municipal administration, have looked at this independently, and to see in fact if on the long term the return on investment pencils out to where there is a true savings. And as you know, your your 11th priority on your goals and objectives was to increase shared services, as we've talked many times, and that was one of your recently stated goals. And we think that we need to have someone externally look at this, in fact determine as we look out many years if this makes sense, rather than to go forth just as we are.
Ms. Johnson, Ms. Kennedy, Ms. Plunkett.
A couple things. One is, would the school board be interested in just having our staff, having our CFO and maybe Mr. Abbott just discuss so we know where everybody is on a staff level with this data center. I feel with this and the shared services, I feel, oh my gosh, here we go again. In public policy, we're always hurry up and waiting, and our timeline is really askewed on this one. So I'm not quite sure what we can do, but I would like to sort of have a discussion at the staff level to even know if this is something that is even possible to discuss, first of all. And secondly, I guess it brings up this shared services policy committee too, because I mean this is all part of this conversation.
Yeah, it's Ms. Kennedy, then Ms. Plunkett, Mr. Horniman, and then Carol.
Well, I appreciate the idea of the staff getting together to maybe make some preliminary, get some preliminary information between the two, because unfortunately I think you're putting the district at a real hard point right now, because we realized unless the offer from the city has changed dramatically, it was not adequate enough for what the district needed to begin with in terms of what the municipality was suggesting we share. And so we were at that point kind of forced to go down a different route, just because our needs were so much more than what was going to be provided in this shared service. So that's what we have done. So in order to get both of those groups talking about like where we're at, and maybe if the pictures change somehow in terms of what's being offered, I think the district needs to know that. But obviously a bigger conversation, because we are well on a road that we believe is going to not only be cost effective in the long run, but will actually suit all of the needs, all of the IT needs of the district at this point. So anyway, that's going to be an important conversation.
Ms. Plunkett?
In addition to that, to kind of target off on what Crystal had said, because that was a little bit of what I was going to, there were some issues at the current MOA site as well that needed to be addressed at a much bigger cost than looking at Kennedy as well, especially from a long-term aspect. But at that time we had looked at the fact of Kennedy potentially housing the MOA instead, and maybe we need, and I don't know where that direction went, but that's the other thing I think we need to look at as well.
Mr. Horniman?
I think the shared committee, I think, would be a good place to review this, but it has to be done quickly because, again, process is already in play. My concern is that the question being done, not that there's some level of distrust, but so that there is no level of distrust. I think it should be a joint question of the vendor rather than just one side asking the questions and everybody relying that the answers are going to be what we're looking for. I mean, it literally needs to be the study where the school district and its experts, subject matter experts, working with the city and its subject matter experts, need to formulate the questions of the study, because I can come in and tell you what I think personally, but if I don't give you a framework of what we're looking for, one side gets an advantage and the other side may end up with a disadvantage. So I think it needs to be fleshed out a little further.
Ms. Cuomo?
Basically, the staff that would need to be part of this is much more than Mr. Abbott and Ms. Mahoney. It needs to be our CIOs, it needs to be our tech staff and our facility staff who, at least from our side, are already been working, and they're the ones with the most direct information on what is already been in place, what we've expended, and what the timelines are. So that's why of the staff, it would need to be a much broader group than you mentioned.
Lucinda?
I just wanted to make a comment based on something Ms. Kennedy said, and that the mayor's. Pardon me?
It's hard to hear you.
The mayor's point was that the decision may have been more beneficial for the district, but the question is it more beneficial for taxpayers? That is really the question. Is it beneficial for taxpayers to be paying for 2 data centers when potentially 1 data center would do? That is the question.
If that were, if it would.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One really quick comment, okay? is it beneficial, thank you, Miss Lucinda. Is it beneficial for taxpayers to pay a contractor $30,000 when it sounds as if, to me, we have enough expertise in-house that may be able to answer some of the questions and pretty quickly? Thank you, Madam President.
Mr. Hahnemann and Mr. Training, and we are over time. Oh, Mr. Training.
The only question is, we paid $125,000 for a study that the results have not even been addressed yet. I worry about doing an additional $30,000. If the $125,000, if what they brought us has been addressed by the administration, that would be one thing. But to now ask for another $30,000 makes no sense.
Ms. Osiander?
I just wanted to announce that January 31st is the last day for bond submittal. Jacqueline was able to get that for me, so if, on that earlier question. On this question, I think that further discussion obviously needs to be had, and we're not gonna do it right now.
Not submittal, final public hearing.
Final public hearing on January. Thank you.
On this matter, my request from the city is to put something in writing on what the ask is of the school district, and then we can determine whether or not that's a school board issue and or an administration issue. And we can also just please remember that we are about to go through our budget times. I know you guys just finished yours, but our staff is ramping up for our budget. So in your ask, if you could put some type of time frame and time needed of staff, it would help us balance our priorities. With that, we're down to
I was going to
comments.
move to adjourn.
I just wanted to make one comment, one heads up to the assembly. I already told the chair, and if Mr. Baker, if you could relay it back to the mayor's office. If we are, as you all know, we're in the midst of our superintendent search. We are hoping to have candidates up for on-site visits in early January, and we would like to make time available for the mayor and the assembly to just have a meet and greet one-on-one with the candidates. We will try to get you those times and places. Just keep that in the back of your head. I just wanted to let you know.
I expressed our appreciation.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Any objection? We are adjourned at 5 after.